Hi there, in this lesson we're going to be looking at writing equations of hyperbolas. And really, as you look down through this is almost exactly the same thing that we did with the ellipse. To write the equation of a hyperbola, we're going to find the center, find the a value, find the b value, and then plug it all in. And again, just like before, the a value here, the a value is essentially the radius of the transverse axis. Okay, so it's half the transverse axis. The b value is essentially the radius of the conjugate axis, so half the conjugate axis. Okay, so we're finding that a value and b value once we have the center, and then plugging it all in. All right. For example, if I look at the first one I'm given a graph here, and I want to find these values. So the first thing I need to do is determine the center, and the center of this one, well, it's just the point that's at the middle, and I can kind of count right to the center and see that it's located right here at the origin. Okay, that's at the middle of everything. It's the midpoint, so the center this time is 0, 0. And then I need to find the a value and the b value. Well, the a value is the radius of the transverse axis. Well, right here is my transverse axis. Remember, the transverse axis, its endpoints are right here, are the vertices. So when I look at the transverse axis, I can see that the transverse axis is 4 units long, which means my a value is a 2. And then the only other thing that's given here, I don't see the conjugate axis because I don't see the magic box, but what I have is the foci. And so when I look at the foci here, the distance from focus to focus, if I look at these values right here, okay, that's like my focal length. The distance from there to there is 8 units, which means my c value then instead, my c value is 4. Okay, just like I did with my ellipse, I can locate the c value, and I might have to use that to find a or b along the way. So my c value is 4. Again, it's like the radius of the foci now instead. All right, and now I can use this formula, c squared equals a squared plus b squared, and I can solve for my b value. So here I've got 16 equals 4 plus b squared. I subtract the 4. That gives me 12 equals b squared. And then I can take the square root of each side, and I'm going to find out that b equals the square root of 12. I'm not going to bother simplifying that or reducing it anyway, because when I plug this in, I'm going to be undoing that square anyway. All right? And now I just need to look at this picture and decide, is this vertical or horizontal? Well, I can see from the picture that it opens left and right. And since this thing opens to the left and right, it means that I'm dealing with a horizontal hyperbola. Okay, so this one's horizontal, so I put it in that format. So I do x minus 0 squared, which is x squared, over a squared, which is 4, minus y minus 0, which is just y squared, over b squared. Well, if b is the square root of 12, if I square that, it's just a 12. And then it's always equal to 1. And that's it. All right, so I find the center, find the a, find the b, plug it in. When I look at the next one, it's giving me the vertices and the conjugate axis and telling me how long that is. So I need to find the center. First of all, again, the center is at the middle of everything. It's the midpoint. So I'm just going to use my midpoint formula. So I do negative 4 plus 6 divided by 2. And then I do 2 plus 2 divided by 2. Here I get a 1. Here I get a 2. 4 divided by 2, which is 2. So I get the ordered pairs 1, 2 for this one. And then my a value, when I think about this, the transverse axis, again, the transverse axis is defined by the vertices. The vertices are my endpoints of the transverse axis. So this right here is my transverse axis. And since the two are the same, the distance here from negative 4 to positive 6 is 10 units. So my transverse axis is 10 units long, which means my a value is just going to be a 5. All right? And then it tells me that my conjugate axis is 8 units long. Well, if that's 8 units long, that's the diameter. Means the b value is just a 4. All right? And now from here, I just need to determine if this thing is vertical or horizontal. I'm just going to think about this in terms of a quick sketch. Let's see where these vertices are. I'm at negative 4, 2, which is up here somewhere, and then positive 6, 2, which is right here somewhere. So that's my transverse axis. My transverse axis is horizontal, which means my hyperbola is horizontal. And even more so than that, I know this thing has to open left and right if my vertices are over here, because they open away from one another. Okay, so now I can see that this thing is horizontal, so I do x minus h squared over a squared, which is 25, minus the y minus k squared over b squared, which is a 16, equals 1. And that's it. For the next one, again, I'm given the vertices and the conjugate axis. So I want to find the center. So if I want to find the center of this thing, I'm essentially just doing my midpoint. So once again, I do the midpoint. It's 1 plus 1 divided by 2. And -1 plus a -9 divided by 2. So here I get a 1. Here it looks like I get a -5 when I add those and divide. So my center is 1, -5. Again, I'm going to find the a value and the b value. This time I look at the vertices. Again, these are the endpoints of my transverse axis. I ignore the 1. I look at the distance from -1 to -9. That's 8 units, which means my a value is a 4. And then the conjugate axis, it tells me right here that that's 6 units long, which means my b value has to be a 3. And now I just determine whether this is going to be vertical or horizontal. So I plot these points, just kind of imagine where they are in space. So I do 1, -1 is down here. I do 1, -9 is down here. So now my transverse axis is running vertically. So I know that this is going to be a vertical hyperbola, right? So I do the y minus k, which is going to be like a +5 squared, over a squared, which is 16, minus the x minus h squared, over b squared, which is 9, equals 1. And that's it, right? If I look at the next one, this time I'm given the vertices and the foci. So for this one, vertices and the foci here, I'm going to go ahead and find my center. I find my center the same way I've been finding it, and I can either use the vertices or the foci this time. It doesn't matter which one I use, but I'm going to find the midpoint. So I do 3 plus 3 divided by 2, and I do the 5 plus the -11 divided by 2. So here that gives me a 3. Here that gives me a -3. So my center is 3, -3. And now I look at this and say, okay, I can determine my a value once again. So I'm going to determine my a value here. These are the endpoints of my transverse axis. I ignore the 3 and I look at the distance here. The distance here is 16, which means my a value is an 8. And now the only other thing that's given, I don't have anything to do with the conjugate axis, which would give me b. What I have instead is the foci. And if I look at the distance right here, just like I did with my ellipse, the distance right here is 20, which means instead of a or b, this is going to give me my c value. Well, if the distance between them is 20, my c value is 10. I approach it the same way I do a and b, except with the foci, I end up with the c value. And now to find the b value, I use that c squared equals a squared plus b squared. And I'm just going to solve this thing. That's going to be 100 equals 64 plus b squared. I'm going to subtract that 64 from each side. So I find out that b squared equals 36. I take the square root of each side. I'm going to find out that b equals a 6. And so now my b value is a 6. I just need to determine if this thing is vertical or horizontal. Again, just think about a quick sketch. The vertices at 3, 5 would be up here somewhere, and then 3, -11 would be down here somewhere. Well, the vertices are above one another. That means this thing is going to open up and down, which means I'm dealing with a vertical ellipse. So I do y minus k, which is like a +3 squared, over a squared, which is 64, minus the x minus h squared over b squared, which is the 36, equals 1. That's it. Okay? If I look at the next one is a little bit of a challenge here. Because for this one, and you'll see as we go through this, but I'm given the center, and I'm looking for a and b. So I do the center of this thing. The center is 0, 3. And now I want to find the a value. Well, it says that the transverse axis is 4, which means the a value is 2. The conjugate axis is 8, which means the b value is 4. And then from here, I just have to decide if this is vertical or horizontal. Well, this one doesn't specify in any way. There's no way I could tell if this is vertical or horizontal. So there are 2 equations that actually fit this criteria. So I'm going to do this one twice. I'm going to write a vertical version and a horizontal version. I'll start with the horizontal. So that's x minus h which is just x squared, over a squared, which is 4, minus the y minus k squared over the b squared, which is 16, equals 1. And then, of course, my vertical version, I would just do the y minus k squared first over a squared, which is still the 4, minus the x minus h squared over the b squared, which is 16, equals 1. And so I get two separate equations that each meet this criteria. One version that's vertical and one version that's horizontal. I accidentally erased part of my vertical version. And there it is, that's it. So again, when we're finding these things, we want to find the center, the a value, the b value, and then we just plug it all in. Okay?